The Arizona heat shimmered off the glass facade of Phoenix Tech Solutions as I pulled into the visitor's parking spot, deliberately choosing the farthest space from the main entrance. 6 months ago, I'd quietly invested $2.8 million into this struggling software company through a private equity firm. Today, I was here as Marcus Chen, supposedly a junior business analyst sent by the investment group to observe operations. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The truth was far more complex. After building and selling 2 successful startups by age 35, I'd transitioned into private equity with a focus on tech companies showing potential but suffering from mismanagement. Phoenix Tech's proposal had caught my attention not because of their pitch, but because of the glaring inconsistencies in their financial projections. The receptionist barely looked up when I introduced myself, her attention fixed on her phone screen. Oh right, the analyst guy. Stephen Walsh, the CEO, said you'd be coming by. Just try to stay out of everyone's way, okay? We're pretty busy around here. I nodded politely, accepting the temporary badge that read Visitor in bold red letters. Perfect. Invisibility was exactly what I needed. As I clipped the badge to my jacket, I noticed Stephen Walsh watching from his corner office, a man in his early 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He made a show of checking his expensive Rolex before disappearing back into his office without acknowledgement. The office buzzed with an energy that didn't match the financial reports I'd been receiving. Developers hunched over multiple monitors. Sales reps worked the phones aggressively, and the marketing team seemed genuinely excited about their latest campaign. Yet somehow, this company was supposedly hemorrhaging money faster than a punctured fuel tank. Stephen Walsh emerged from the corner office 20 minutes later, making his entrance feel deliberately timed. He gave me a firm handshake while his eyes calculated something I couldn't quite read. Marcus, right? Look, I appreciate the investment group sending someone, but honestly, we've got everything under control here. Feel free to look around, ask questions, whatever. Just remember, you're here to observe, not to manage. We don't need another consultant trying to fix things that aren't broken. His dismissal was professional but pointed. As he walked away, I caught him whispering something to his assistant, who immediately glanced in my direction before nodding. I spent my first day doing exactly what he'd suggested, observing. What I saw didn't match the narrative I'd been fed. The development team had energy, the kind of focused intensity you see in successful startups. Sarah Kim, the lead developer, was coordinating what looked like a major product launch. Her team worked with the precision of people who believed in their mission. The sales floor buzzed with activity. Phone calls overlapped as representatives closed deals with enthusiasm that seemed genuine. I overheard mentions of contracts with major healthcare systems, educational institutions, and manufacturing companies, yet somehow, according to the reports Stephen submitted quarterly, this company was supposedly hemorrhaging money faster than a punctured fuel tank. The contradiction gnawed at me throughout lunch. I'd seen failing companies before. The atmosphere was usually toxic, people looked for exit strategies, and productivity ground to a halt. Phoenix Tech showed none of those symptoms. By my second week, I'd established a routine that made me nearly invisible. I arrived early with coffee and basic questions, stayed late taking notes, and cultivated the image of someone trying hard to understand real business. The strategy worked perfectly. People began talking around me as if I weren't there. During morning coffee runs, I'd overhear sales targets being exceeded. In elevator conversations, developers discussed successful client implementations. The marketing team celebrated campaign metrics that would make any startup founder jealous. That's when I met Jennifer Rodriguez, the head of accounting. She was working through lunch again, buried in spreadsheets that seemed to frustrate her more each day. Dark circles under her eyes suggested this was a regular occurrence. Tough numbers? I asked, settling into the chair across from her desk with what I hoped looked like naive curiosity. Jennifer looked up, her eyes tired but sharp. She glanced toward Stephen's office, a habit I'd noticed several employees had developed. You could say that. We're supposedly running at a massive loss, but... She paused, her fingers drumming against the desk. Well, it's not my place to question the executive reports. The way she said, supposedly, caught my attention. There was skepticism there, carefully hidden but unmistakable. Over the next few days, Jennifer and I developed an unspoken understanding. She'd leave certain files accidentally visible when I walked by her desk. I'd ask innocent questions about accounting practices that let her vent her frustrations without technically violating any protocols. You know, she said one afternoon while showing me routine expense reports, I've been doing accounting for 12 years. Started right out of college at a Big Four firm, worked my way up through 3 different companies. I've seen creative bookkeeping before, but this. She trailed off, shaking her head. The picture that emerged was stunning. Phoenix Tech Solutions wasn't losing money, it was generating substantial profits that were being systematically diverted through a web of consulting fees, inflated vendor contracts, and mysterious operational expenses that seemed to multiply. Every quarter. One afternoon, while Jennifer was in a client meeting, I accessed her computer using credentials she'd shared for a training exercise on quarterly reporting procedures. What I found made my blood run cold. A folder labeled Executive Compensation Review contained payment authorizations for amounts that dwarfed the salaries on the official payroll. Stephen Walsh wasn't just taking a CEO salary, he was funneling company profits through shell consulting companies with names like Strategic Business Solutions LLC and Operational Excellence Partners. Equipment leases to entities he controlled charged the company triple market rate for basic office furniture. Bonus structures triggered every time the company reported of loss, creating a perverse incentive where Stephen's personal wealth grew. In direct proportion to the company's reported failure, the more losses he reported to investors, the more money he pocketed. But the most disturbing discovery was a series of emails between Stephen and someone identified only as T. Morrison. The messages were coded but clear enough. Other investors were being systematically deceived about the company's performance. Stephen was building toward a massive emergency funding request that would essentially be theft disguised as desperate necessity. I was photographing the documents when Jennifer returned unexpectedly, her meeting apparently cut short. "Marcus, what are you?" She stopped mid-sentence, seeing the evidence displayed on her screen. "Oh my God. You found it." "Found what?" She closed the door and activated the white noise machine she kept for confidential calls. "I've been tracking these discrepancies for months. But every time I try to bring it up in meetings, Stephen shuts me down. Says I don't understand the bigger picture of running a tech company." Her hand shook slightly as she spoke. "Last month, I tried to schedule a meeting with the board. Stephen found out and told me that kind of disloyalty wouldn't be tolerated." She pulled out her phone and showed me a text message. "Jennifer, I hope you understand that your employment here depends on your ability to support the team. Let's not create unnecessary drama. I've been afraid to escalate it because I need this job," she continued. "Single mom, 2 kids, mortgage. And honestly, I wasn't sure who to trust. For all I knew, the investors were in on it." That evening, Jennifer and I met at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Phoenix, far from anyone who might recognize us. She arrived carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had seen better days. "I've been preparing for this conversation for weeks," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I just never knew who to have it with." She brought copies of everything: bank statements showing mysterious wire transfers, vendor agreements with companies that existed only as P.O. boxes, consulting fees paid to entities with no apparent services rendered. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously organized. "There's more," she said, pulling out a second folder. "Stephen's been manipulating customer payment schedules. We'll receive a payment from a client, it gets recorded in our systems, but then it disappears into these shell accounts before it ever hits our official revenue numbers." She showed me a particularly damning example: a $400,000 payment from a major client that was received on Tuesday, recorded as income on Wednesday, then transferred to Operational Excellence Partners by Friday as a consulting fee for services that were never rendered. "The beautiful part of his scheme," Jennifer continued, "is that it makes us look unprofitable to investors while he pockets the actual profits. He gets emergency funding requests approved based on fake losses while keeping the real money for himself." "There's a board meeting scheduled for next Thursday," she added, stirring her coffee absently. "Stephen's presenting the quarterly report. He's going to ask for another emergency funding round, claims the company needs $5 million more just to survive the next 6 months." I knew that meeting was happening. I also knew I wasn't invited. According to Stephen, junior analysts had no business in board-level discussions. "Jennifer," I said carefully, "what would you say if I told you that an emergency funding request is going to be denied?" She looked puzzled, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. "How could you possibly know that? Do you have contacts at the investment firm?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I chose my words carefully, not ready to reveal everything yet. Let's just say I have more insight into investor sentiment than Stephen realizes. As we left the diner, Jennifer grabbed my arm. "Marcus, whatever you're planning, please be careful. Stephen has connections I don't fully understand. People who've crossed him before have had their careers destroyed. I'm talking about industry blacklisting, legal harassment, the works. Her warning echoed in my mind as I drove home. Stephen Walsh was about to discover that some connections run deeper than others. The morning of the board meeting, I arrived at the office early and positioned myself in the conference room adjacent to the boardroom. I discovered the night before that the building's architect had made a curious design choice. The two rooms shared a ventilation system, making conversations surprisingly audible between spaces. Through the glass partition, I had a perfect view of Stephen's preparation ritual. He arranged his presentation materials with obsessive precision, practiced his opening remarks while staring at his reflection in the dark monitor, and made what appeared to be a final coordination call with someone he addressed as T. At exactly 10 a.m., the board meeting commenced. The three board members appeared on the large wall-mounted screen: Harrison Mitchell from the New York office, Patricia Huang calling in from San Francisco, and Robert Kim joining from Chicago. Their faces showed the kind of concern you'd expect when reviewing a company hemorrhaging money. Stephen entered the boardroom wearing his most expensive suit, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who delivered this performance before. His presentation was masterful in its deception: charts showing devastating losses, projections that painted Phoenix Tech as a company on life support, and testimonials about his own tireless efforts to save a sinking ship. Ladies and gentlemen, the market conditions have been far more challenging than anyone anticipated, Stephen began, clicking through slides that showed carefully manipulated financial data. Our customer acquisition costs have skyrocketed, retention rates are declining, and frankly, our product market fit isn't where we hoped it would be. The board members leaned forward, their expressions growing more grave with each slide. Without immediate capital injection, we're looking at bankruptcy within 60 days, Stephen concluded with practiced desperation. I'm requesting authorization for a $5 million emergency funding round to keep this company operational while we execute our turnaround strategy. Board member Harrison spoke first, his voice heavy with concern. Stephen, these losses are far worse than anything we've seen in our initial projections. How did things deteriorate so quickly? Our due diligence showed promise. Market conditions? Increased competition, operational challenges we couldn't have foreseen, Stephen replied smoothly, his rehearsed answers flowing effortlessly. Sometimes even the best business plans can't account for external factors. The tech landscape changed faster than we adapted. Patricia Huang chimed in, the numbers you're showing us suggest fundamental problems with the business model. Are we looking at a company worth saving, or should we cut our losses? Stephen's performance intensified. Patricia, I understand your concern, but I've been in this industry for 15 years. I've navigated downturns before. What we need is faith and funding, not panic. I'd heard enough. The lies were so fluid, so convincing, that I understood how he'd maintained this charade for months. Time to end the performance. I stood up and walked toward the boardroom door, my visitor badge still prominently displayed on my jacket. Stephen noticed me through the glass and his face flushed red with immediate anger. What are you doing here? This is a private meeting. You have no business. I apologize for the interruption, I said, stepping into the room with deliberate calm. But I believe there are some significant inaccuracies in your presentation that need to be addressed before any funding decisions are made. Stephen's voice rose to a near shout, his carefully maintained composure cracking. You're just an analyst. You have no authority to be in this room. Security should escort you out immediately. This is completely inappropriate. He reached for his phone, presumably to call security, but I raised my hand. Actually, Stephen, before you make that call, there's something the board should know about the financial data you just presented. The board members looked confused. Harrison spoke up, his brow furrowed. Stephen, who is this person? Why is there an analyst in your board meeting? Nobody important, Stephen snapped, his professional mask completely gone now. Just some junior analyst the investment group sent to waste our time with basic questions. I'll have him removed right now. This is exactly the kind of unprofessional behavior. I smiled calmly and pulled out my phone, maintaining eye contact with Stephen as his face grew paler. Actually, gentlemen, I think there's someone you should meet. Someone who can clarify exactly who has authority in this room. I dialed a number I knew by heart. When the call connected, I put it on speaker, the sound filling the suddenly silent boardroom. Thompson and Associates Private Equity, David Thompson speaking. David, it's me, I said, never breaking eye contact with Stephen. I'm in the Phoenix Tech boardroom with Stephen Walsh and the board. I think it's time they knew who they're really talking to. Stephen's face went white as realization began to dawn. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Certainly, Marcus, David replied with professional warmth. Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Marcus Chen, not a junior analyst, but the managing partner of Thompson and Associates and the primary investor who provided your initial $2.8 million in funding. He also holds controlling interest in Phoenix Tech Solutions with a 51% stake through our equity arrangement. The silence in the room was deafening. I watched as the board members' expressions shifted from confusion to understanding to barely contained fury. Though their anger wasn't directed at me, Stephen slumped back in his chair, the weight of his situation finally registering. You're not. I'm not a junior analyst, no, I confirmed, ending the call. I'm the person you've been systematically defrauding for the past 6 months. I addressed the board directly, my voice steady and professional. Stephen has been systematically embezzling company profits while reporting false losses to justify additional funding requests. What you've just seen isn't a struggling company, it's an elaborate fraud designed to steal millions from investors. On cue, the boardroom door opened and Jennifer Rodriguez entered, carrying a thick folder of documents and a laptop bag. Her timing was perfect, we'd coordinated this moment down to the minute. Jennifer Rodriguez, our head of accounting, will be presenting the real financial data, I continued. The evidence will show that Phoenix Tech has not only been profitable for the past 6 months but has generated approximately $3.2 million in actual profits that Stephen has diverted to shell companies. Jennifer connected her laptop to the presentation screen, her hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. The first slide showed a side-by-side comparison, Stephen's reported losses on the left, actual company profits on the right. Every dollar of losses Stephen reported has been diverted to entities he controls, I explained as Jennifer clicked through bank transfers, shell company registrations, and inflated vendor contracts. Strategic Business Solutions LLC, operational. Excellence Partners, Premium Office Solutions, all registered to addresses Stephen owns, all billing Phoenix Tech for services that were never rendered. The evidence was overwhelming. Stephen had been charging the company $50,000 monthly for strategic consulting through companies that existed only on paper. Office furniture leases at triple market rate. Software licenses for programs that were never installed. Marketing fees for campaigns that never ran. But the most damning evidence, Jennifer said, speaking directly to the board for the first time, is this email chain between Stephen and someone identified as T. Morrison, discussing how to maximize emergency funding opportunities while maintaining plausible deniability. The emails appeared on screen, showing Stephen's correspondence about creating artificial crisis situations to justify funding requests. The language was coded but unmistakable, they were discussing how to steal from investors while appearing to be desperate company leaders. Patricia Huang's voice cut through the silence. Stephen, these documents show you've stolen nearly $3 million from this company. Is there any explanation you'd like to offer? Stephen tried to interrupt twice, but I raised my hand each time. You've had 6 months to explain these numbers honestly. Now it's our turn to present the facts. When the last document was displayed, I leaned back in my chair and addressed the board with finality. Gentlemen, this meeting is no longer about emergency funding. It's about criminal fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and the immediate termination of Stephen Walsh. We'll be filing criminal charges within 24 hours. Stephen slumped in his chair, his elaborate scheme crumbling around him like a house of cards. The man who had dismissed me as nobody important just minutes earlier now faced federal charges and the complete destruction of his career. This is all a misunderstanding, Stephen finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I can explain the accounting discrepancies. There are legitimate business reasons, Stephen, Harrison interrupted, his voice cold with controlled fury. We have bank records showing you've stolen nearly $3 million. We have emails discussing fraud strategies. We have shell company registrations in your name. What exactly is there to misunderstand? Within hours, security had escorted Stephen from the building. His personal items were packed into boxes while he waited in handcuffs. The FBI's white-collar crime unit had been contacted, and Stephen's assets were frozen pending investigation. Jennifer Rodriguez was promoted to interim CFO that same afternoon, with a permanent appointment confirmed by week's end. Her first official act was to terminate all contracts with Stephen's shell companies and recover every possible dollar. I still can't believe you let him call you nobody important for 6 months, she said as we watched Stephen's final departure from the building. 3 weeks later, at Jennifer's official promotion ceremony, the company's transformation was visible everywhere. The anxiety that had hung over employees was replaced by genuine excitement about Phoenix Tech's future. With the stolen profits recovered and proper financial management in place, the company was positioned for aggressive growth. Sarah Kim approached me during the celebration. Marcus, I have to ask, how long did you know? Know what? That Steven was stealing from us. I mean, you had to suspect something from day one, right? I considered her question carefully. The numbers never made sense. You were building great software, landing major clients, exceeding every operational metric that mattered. But the money kept disappearing. Sometimes the best way to catch a thief is to let them think they're the smartest person in the room. As the celebration continued around us, I reflected on a lesson that went beyond business. Steven had made the classic mistake of assuming that titles and positions reflected actual power. He dismissed me because of a visitor badge, never considering that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone ignores. Phoenix Tech's real journey was just beginning. But it would be built on truth this time, not on the elaborate lies of someone who thought he could steal millions simply because he'd convinced everyone he was in charge. 2 days after the board meeting confrontation, I was reviewing the seized financial records in Phoenix Tech's conference room when Jennifer knocked on the door, her expression troubled. "Marcus, we have a problem. A big one." She set down a manila envelope thick with documents. While going through Steven's personal files, I found correspondence with other companies. He wasn't just running this scheme here. The papers revealed a network spanning 3 other tech startups across Colorado, Nevada, and Texas. Steven had been replicating his fraud model, using his reputation as a turnaround specialist to gain positions where he could systematically steal from investors. TechFlow Solutions in Denver, DataBridge Systems in Vegas, and CloudNet Innovations in Austin, Jennifer read from the list. Same pattern: shell companies, inflated contracts, emergency funding requests based on manufactured losses. I studied the documents, my mind racing. How much are we talking about total? Conservative estimate? 15 to 20 million across all 4 companies. But Marcus, there's something else. She pulled out a leather-bound notebook. This was in Steven's desk drawer. It's like a playbook. The notebook contained detailed strategies for identifying vulnerable investors, building trust with board members, and maintaining fraud schemes long-term. Steven had turned corporate theft into a systematic methodology. Step 1. Target companies with remote or passive investors, I read aloud. Step 2. Establish yourself as indispensable through early small successes. Step 3. Create financial complexity that discourages close scrutiny. Jennifer nodded grimly. There are profiles of potential targets, including companies he was researching for future schemes. Marcus, this man was building an empire of fraud. Within 48 hours, I'd contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division and the SEC. Special Agent Rebecca Torres arrived at Phoenix Tech on Friday morning, accompanied by a team of forensic accountants. "Mr. Chen, this case has implications far beyond Phoenix Tech," Agent Torres explained as we walked through the office. "Stephen Walsh appears to have been operating a sophisticated fraud network targeting private equity investments specifically." She showed me a tablet displaying a complex flowchart. "We've identified at least 12 potential victims across 6 states. Your documentation from Phoenix Tech is helping us build cases against the entire network." The investigation revealed that Steven's mysterious contact, T. Morrison, was actually Theodore Morrison, a corrupt investment advisor who'd been feeding Steven inside information about vulnerable companies and wealthy individual investors. Morrison would identify targets, usually successful entrepreneurs who'd moved into investing but remained hands-off, Agent Torres continued. Then Steven would position himself as the solution to their problems while systematically robbing them. But the scope went even deeper. Steven and Morrison had been sharing intelligence with a network of similar fraudsters, creating what the FBI termed a syndicate of corporate theft. As news of Steven's arrest spread, employees throughout Phoenix Tech began sharing stories they'd previously kept quiet. Mike Rodriguez, a senior developer, approached me in the hallway 3 days after the board meeting. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. 6 months ago, I tried to report suspicious payments to a whistleblower hotline. The next day, Steven called me into his office and threatened to destroy my career if I spread rumors." Similar stories emerged throughout the week. Sarah Kim, the lead developer, had been pressured to sign inflated contracts for software licenses. Tom Anderson in sales had been forced to backdate client agreements to hide Steven's timing manipulations. "He created a culture of fear," Jennifer observed during one of our evening strategy sessions. "People knew something was wrong, but they were too scared to speak up." Steven made sure everyone understood that questioning him meant career suicide. The psychological manipulation had been as sophisticated as the financial fraud. Steven had systematically isolated potential whistleblowers while rewarding those who stayed silent about his activities. Recovering Phoenix Tech's stolen assets became a complex legal battle. Stephen had hidden money across multiple jurisdictions, using cryptocurrency exchanges and offshore accounts to obscure the trail. The good news, explained our forensic accountant Janet Miller, is that Stephen got greedy. The bad news is that he got sophisticated. We're looking at months of legal proceedings to recover everything. But there were immediate victories. The shell companies Stephen had created were quickly dissolved, and their bank accounts were frozen. Within 2 weeks, we'd recovered $1.8 million of the $3.2 million he'd stolen from Phoenix Tech. It's not just about the money, I told the assembled staff during an all-hands meeting. It's about rebuilding trust and proving that Phoenix Tech's success was never dependent on Stephen Walsh. You built something great here, he just tried to steal credit for it. The company's actual financial health, once revealed, attracted legitimate investors almost immediately. 2 venture capital firms approached us within a month, offering funding based on Phoenix Tech's real performance metrics. Despite the professional victory, the experience had taken its toll. Jennifer confided that she'd been seeing a therapist to deal with the stress of working under Stephen's threats for months. I keep second-guessing myself, she admitted during a quiet conversation in her office. 6 months of being told your professional judgment is worthless, that doesn't just disappear overnight. For my part, the investigation had revealed uncomfortable truths about my own investment practices. I'd been too hands-off, too trusting of quarterly reports and board presentations. The experience forced me to completely restructure how Thompson and Associates monitored its portfolio companies. This can't happen again, I told David Thompson during a secure video call. We need embedded oversight, direct access to financial systems, and regular employee feedback channels. No more relying purely on executive reports. The changes we implemented became a model for other private equity firms. Within 6 months, the Phoenix Protocol, named after our experience, was being adopted across the industry as a standard. For fraud prevention, Stephen Walsh's trial was scheduled for 8 months after his arrest. As the key witness, I spent dozens of hours with prosecutors preparing testimony that would help convict not just Stephen, but the entire fraud network he'd been part of. The defense will try to paint you as a vindictive investor who destroyed an honest CEO, warned prosecutor Amanda Hayes. They'll claim Stephen was a scapegoat for normal business struggles. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, email communications, witness testimony from 4 different companies, and Stephen's own detailed fraud playbook created an unshakable case. Theodore Morrison had already pleaded guilty in exchange for cooperation. His testimony revealed that Stephen's network had been planning to expand internationally, targeting tech startups in London, Toronto, and Sydney. Stephen Walsh wasn't just a thief, Morrison testified during a preliminary hearing. He was building a franchise model for corporate fraud. The goal was to systematically exploit the trust that makes investment relationships possible. The Phoenix Tech case attracted national attention in the business media. Harvard Business School invited me to speak about fraud detection in private equity. The SEC updated its guidelines for investment oversight based partly on our experience, but the most meaningful impact was local. Phoenix Tech, freed from Stephen's schemes, became one of Arizona's fastest-growing technology companies. Within a year, we'd expanded from 45 to 120 employees and landed contracts with major corporations across multiple industries. Jennifer Rodriguez, now permanently installed as CFO, implemented financial transparency measures that became an industry benchmark. Every employee had access to monthly financial summaries. Board meetings included mandatory time for employee questions. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, Jennifer often said. If everyone can see how money flows through the company, schemes like Stephen's become impossible to hide. 2 years later, at Phoenix Tech's IPO celebration, I reflected on how a simple visitor badge had enabled one of the most significant fraud discoveries in recent Arizona business history. The most dangerous assumption in business, I told the assembled crowd, is that titles reflect reality. Stephen Walsh taught me that real power often lies with the people everyone else ignores, the accountants who see the numbers, the employees who do the work, and yes, sometimes the junior analysts who ask uncomfortable questions. The visitor badge from my first day at Phoenix Tech now sits framed in my office, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, in both directions. Stephen had assumed I was powerless because of how I presented myself. I'd learned that true authority comes not from titles or corner offices, but from the courage to seek truth regardless of the consequences. Phoenix Tech's success story has become proof that companies built on honest foundations will always outperform those built on elaborate lies. But more importantly, it had shown that sometimes the best way to catch a sophisticated criminal is to let them underestimate the quiet person taking notes in the corner. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.